So one of the reasons why I keep reiterating this is so when you guys are explaining this information to people, you do not forget this real proven history and let people, interject their false Bible history. You got to understand what took place and that we got this inception of the Bible with the Greeks. Plain and simple. So you have the letters of Orestes, as I talked about. You have the Hebrew law being converted into Greek by the 72 Hebrew elders from the 12 tribes of Israel at the command of Ptolemy II Philadelphus. So already established, that is out there. So again, you have the inception of the book beginning with the Greeks and the Septuagint. Plain and simple. There's nobody nowhere that can prove anything prior to that as having a biblical manuscript before this point. And it was given to us by the Greeks. So that's laid out. That's another thing that is established. So now we got to move forward and look at that history as I already talked about. We're not going to go into all that and really get up to the point where everything is starting to really, take place, where you have Rome basically coming in and conquering, and then you have them basically continuing Hellenization for a very important reason. Now we know that reason was because of control, power. They had so many people under this influence of this religion that they continued that and the spreading of it, plain and simple. So again, you just ask yourself the simple basic question: if Hellenization, because you're going to have this argument, if Hellenization was about the Greeks spreading all this, Zeus religion and, all this Greek mythology religion or what have you, how come it didn't stick throughout, any of these countries? In fact, you have Judaism that did stick because this is what they were spreading and not Egyptian or Greek mythology, I should say. So they continued it to keep the power going, to keep that going, because they had their own plans, obviously. And the reason why we have Christianity later, as I said, is because that backfired with the whole war, the Jewish war. So it's not a coincidence that we have, the Greeks and the original Torah written in Greek, not Hebrew. As I said, we never found the Hebrew Torah or what have you. So we have that in Greek with the Septuagint, as well as the Old Testament, New Testament being in Greek as well because of the Greeks. So you have one of the key pieces to this whole puzzle is Dr. Joseph Yehuda's book, Hebrew is Greek, on how he proved that the Greeks created the Hebrew language. So I'm going to read from this here. It says, Mr. Yehuda claims that overwhelming evidence proves conclusively that Biblical Hebrew is camouflaged Greek. Biblical Hebrew is camouflaged Greek in grammar as well as vocabulary, and that by and large the difference between them is a matter of pronunciation. So much so that the Hebrew cannot be properly understood except through Greek, and that Greek may be better understood through Hebrew. The camouflage or mask which conceals the identity of Hebrew with Greek has a code, and Mr. Yehuda has broken the cipher and formulated rules of decoding, the accuracy of which can be tried over and over again. And that means when you keep doing it, it's going to keep giving you the same result. Stripped of this camouflage and allowing for differences of pronunciation, the words of both languages reveals their identity with each other. And the result, many obscure words and puzzling passages become clear, and the biblical vocabulary is vastly enriched. It emerges from his vast and meticulous physiological research that the Hebrews were of Hellenic descent. Now he would say that because of this language, meaning that they had to be some kind of Greek, Hellenic descent, and that they were both intimately related to the Greeks by religion and custom, that the traditional segregation of the Indo-European from the so-called Semitic languages is baseless, that a considerable revision of our amount of the Jewish and Arab people is required, and that the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic cultures, the triple pillars of modern civilization, have a common Hellenic foundation. And as I said, he has also proven that Arabic as well was created by the Greeks. Clear as day, their foundation begins with Greek. And one of the things, I've been talking about this book for years, and if you have a copy, you lucky because they are gone. Go and try to find you a copy right now. Remember, I was showing you pictures before of this book, being on Amazon for sale, and how it had rose from $700 all the way up to $7,000 before now it disappeared. Somebody has meticulously went out, searched through the internet, and bought every single copy because I had links to other books. Luckily for me, I got myself 2 copies before they're gone now. You can't buy a copy. Find a copy, see if you can buy one. You can't find one unless it's in a university library probably. They probably won't have all the pages. So there's a reason why they got rid of this book the same way they got rid of many other books, because they don't want people having that information. The information is out there, and it's the truth, and it's 100% proven that the Greeks created the Hebrew language as well as Arabic. So when we get into the why of it all, what I'm trying to express to you in these videos is to understand that the reason why they created Judaism was to basically change the spiritual beliefs of the African people in ancient Kemet and in the land that we know today as Israel, which, as I said before, was a part of ancient Egyptian territory. So this is why it was done. You can see that the ancient Egyptians understood and knew, what the Greeks was talking about, what they were about, and the fact that they were being taught by, the ancient Egyptians in the mystery schools. So anything that they tried to pass along to these people, they already understood to be false. So again, through indoctrination, starting with the young, they started to spread this doctrine to get the people to go out and spread it. But this was the point and purpose of it, was to change the spirituality of these people. So you fast forward to Rome coming in power, Rome continuing Hellenization, as I said, and you have a lot going on. So Rome basically did what we see these corporations doing today with business. They created their own competition. So you have Pepsi creating Mountain Dew, and you have Coca-Cola and Pepsi creating all these other soft drinks and juices or what have you. They created their own competition. That way nobody can jump in there and try to compete with them, and bring the market up against their product. They created their own competition. So anybody who tries to come in and compete has to not only deal with the main brand, but with all these other competitors. So this is what they did. So you have the Roman Church, you have them coming up with Christianity. And we know, forget what it says biblically about Christianity and how it started. No matter where you look, plain and simple, if it wasn't for Rome, Rome is responsible for the spreading and everything that we see with the inception of Christianity and how big it became. They took the Greeks, Septuagint Greek, and put it into their Vetus Latina. Plain and simple. There is no Vetus Latina without the Septuagint Greek, which the Vetus Latina contains the Old Testament and the New Testament. We don't get these codexes. We don't get the Latin Vulgate. We don't get none of these books without the Greek Septuagint. Plain and simple. So the fact that they had the whole thing in their Vetus Latina should tell you something. They continue Hellenization, which is the spreading of this doctrine. And then you move forward. What do we see next? We see so much influence, Rome and the rise of their power. So much influence they have with many different civilizations and people. We see Pope Leo X, basically with the whole forgiveness for sins thing. Basically, people trying to buy their way into heaven. He had this whole campaign going on where he was basically selling indulgences, giving people the opportunity to basically buy their soul into heaven, or buy someone who's passed soul into heaven or out of purgatory or what have you. This is what was going on. So you had a lot of people looking at the church and saying, you know what, this isn't right. By this point in time, you had the Christianity spread so well, and you had so many people believing in the doctrine so much that they began to question Rome and say, you know what, how can you guys be really about the book when you basically follow nothing from it? You're not following what the book is really about. So you have the Europeans look up and basically see Rome, conquering and raping and pillaging and committing all these crimes against the Bible, yet they're supposed to be the authority on the religion. In fact, they're going out basically teaching basically against what they're actually doing, and the people are seeing that, and they're they questioned the Pope and his actions and everything that, they was doing, especially when you have a Pope that's basically selling indulgences and selling sin, basically saying that if you pay this money, you can get into heaven, you can sin, you can do what have you. And the simple fact that, one, that you got to go through them to get to God was something that people was just like, come on, what's going on here? This is why you had a lot of wars going on around that time between the Europeans, because the Pope was sending the Knights Templars and sending their armies out there to wipe out these, pre-Protestant, towns and people who was talking against the Pope. They was getting them out of there. So, they had a lot of different ways that they was spreading this book. And a lot of people was picking up on the fact that it just wasn't fitting right with what Rome was doing. So this is why we had the Geneva Bible basically come out and call the Pope the Antichrist. And you had a lot of people subscribe more to the Geneva Bible than any other of the other books. Once you had, you go back to the beginning, you look at John Wycliffe. Back in the 14th century, basically was one of the biggest, people against Rome and organized churches. So he basically said that the Roman Catholic Church was, bullshit, because they was basically not really giving us a true interpretation of what the book was about. We had to basically go about what they were saying, and if it wasn't a proper translation, then how could we really know what the truth was? So this is one of the reasons why he did a translation. Now it says here, the first handwritten English language Bible manuscripts were produced in the 1380s AD by John Wycliffe, an Oxford professor, scholar, and theologian. Wycliffe was well known throughout Europe for his opposition to the teachings of the organized church, which he believed to be contrary to the Bible. With the help of his followers, called the Lollards, and his assistant Purvey, and many other faithful scribes, Wycliffe produced dozens of English language manuscript copies of the scriptures. They were translated out of the Latin Vulgate, which was the only source text available to Wycliffe. The Pope was so infuriated by his teachings and his translation of the Bible into English that 44 years after Wycliffe had died, he ordered the bones to be dug up, crushed, and scattered in the river. It says one of Wycliffe's followers, John Huss, actively promoted Wycliffe's idea that people should be permitted to read the Bible in their own language, and they should oppose the tyranny of the Roman Church that threatened anyone possessing a non-Latin Bible with execution. Huss was burnt at the stake in 1415, with Wycliffe's manuscript Bible used as kindling for the fire. The last words of John Huss were that in 100 years God will raise up a man whose calls for reform cannot be suppressed. Almost exactly 100 years later, in 1517, Martin Luther nailed his famous 95 Theses of Contention, a list of 95 issues of heretical theology and crimes of the Roman Catholic Church, into the church door at Wittenberg. The prophecy of Huss had come true. Martin Luther went on to be the first person to translate and publish the Bible in the commonly spoken dialect of the German people, a translation more appealing than previous German biblical translations. Fox's Book of Martyrs records that in the same year, 1517, 7 people were burnt at the stake by the Roman Catholic Church for the crime of teaching their children to say the Lord's Prayer in English rather than Latin. So, I went through this before, and the point in bringing this up again, a lot of people already know about this, but the point in bringing this up is to get people to understand, one, you have people questioning Rome and the Pope about what they're doing and not really being really critical about everything else. So if you have Rome being the authority that gave us the book, and then they themselves going against the book, what does that tell you about the book itself? If they are the ones who gave us the book and pushed the book, and everything we know about the Bible biblically came from them, there's no other source we can get it from. You can go with the lies that they told, but still they're the ones who compiled the books and did everything to bring the books together. People were using the Latin Vulgate, as I said, John Wycliffe, that's where he got his source from. So even if you do a translation, you're doing a translation from what they gave you. So if these people are questioning the people who gave you the book, how do you not question the book itself? So the simple fact that if God of the Bible was real, in Rome, here you have so many people accusing Rome of basically going against the book. You have the Geneva Bible calling them the Antichrist. How can these people remain in power if the God of the Bible is real? And these people are the ones who gave it to us. These are the people who are basically going out and controlling the doctrine and controlling the religion. So as you've seen, nobody else was allowed to translate the book into any other language. So there you have the proof that Rome is controlling the book, controlling the religion. Yet no one questions the religion itself. They only question Rome. And these are the people who gave it to you. So that should tell you right then and there something is up. But can't be right, because God is not punishing these people. In fact, they're going out and conquering and getting stronger and stronger. And it's not a coincidence that you read in Romans that it says clear as day that the powers that be were ordained by God, that God put these people in power. The authority figures was put in power by God. And here you have Rome being in power. So you have many people out there basically seeing through Rome and seeing what was going on. But again, not really asking the questions of, if we're questioning Rome, then we have to question the Bible. Not really looking into that point. So we have many people, talking about the fact that they're going around preaching this, but doing that, so on and so forth. But of course, they got their hands into a lot of kingdoms, and they were basically following this Christian doctrine, and it became the popular thing to do, to where, of course, it spread to the Europeans and of course to England. And you had, once these English translations began, remember, John Radcliffe wrote his before the printing press. So he had his done and written out a bunch of different copies before the printing press by Johann Gutenberg. So those copies, was out there. And you had then, after the printing press, you had with the Geneva Bible all the criticisms, citations in the book that was funny, things that was challenging the church, challenging Rome, calling the Pope the Antichrist, stuff like that. So, fast forward a little bit to King Henry VIII, as I talked about before, how that whole thing came about. King Henry VIII basically being mad at the Pope for not granting him a divorce from his wife, so he basically can marry his mistress or what have you. And he wanted a divorce supposedly because she couldn't give him a son, an heir to the throne. And because of this, he basically got mad and kicked Rome out of the English Empire, as far as them having their hands in any religious part. So eventually you would get the Great Bible. And as I said, with the Great Bible and with Queen Elizabeth and the Bishop's Bible or what have you, you would basically get them trying to take out anything that was Romanist or that had to deal with Rome from out of the book. Talk about this before too. And to get it out of here. So you had around this time, since you had so many people talking against Rome, you had what developed was, you had the Protestants or the Puritans, and you had these people basically going in on the language of the book, because that's basically what it came down to. So now you have these people saying, well, we can't trust Rome, everything's in Latin, we don't know what the book is really saying, Rome is going against the book, how can we trust Rome, how can we trust it in this language, let's do this translation. But then it became, once the translations was done, then it became, okay, well, how can we translate it so it's close to the original Hebrew, or exactly what we need to be hearing. And that became the issue as well. So after the Bishop's Bible and all the problems that they found and flaws in that book, this is where you have the King James Version. And you have a lot of people who are unclear on why King James basically was tasked with this version. So now it says here, with the death of Queen Elizabeth I, Prince James VI of Scotland became King James I of England. The Protestant clergy approached the new king in 1604 and announced their desire for a new translation to replace the Bishop's Bible, first printed in 1568. They knew that the Geneva version had won the hearts of the people because of its excellent scholarship, accuracy, and exhaustive commentary. However, they did not want the controversial marginal notes proclaiming the Pope and Antichrist, etc. Essentially, the leaders of the church desire a Bible for the people with scriptural references only for word clarification or cross references. So like we have with the presidency, you have a president who runs, the war on terror. He runs on, the war on drugs or what have you. This was basically King James' way to get in with the people and basically come in as saying, I'm going to be the king that's going to give us the correct Bible. And you have a lot of people who don't understand. One, you have with the Hebrews saying that, King James gave us a perfect Bible, that he was, basically touched by God and tasked to give us this book in the correct way. So now, even after the King James Version was out, for over 200 years, it still wasn't considered right. So the whole notion that, God put a spirit on King James, or King James had this, spiritually, biblically right, process to give us the perfect Bible, or that he was touched by God or angels in some kind of way to give us a perfect book, is bull, because the book wasn't considered correct. We know in the 1800s they took out the Apocrypha, and there was a lot of flaws found in the book, and they had to change a lot of words over. So still, even with King James, the book we still use to this day, we didn't have a perfect book. Now it's saying here, a committee established by the Convocation of Canterbury in February 1870 reported favorably 3 months later on the idea of revising the King James Version. Who is this we're talking about? We're talking about white men. This is white people. 2 companies were formed, one each for the Old and New Testaments. A novel development was the inclusion of scholars representatives of the major Christian traditions, except Roman Catholics, who declined the invitation to participate. Another invocation was the formation of parallel companies in the United States, to whom the work of the British scholars was submitted, and who in turn sent back their reactions. The instructions to the committees made clear that only a revision, not a new translation, was contemplated. The New Testament was published in Britain on May 17, 1881, and 3 days later in the United States, after 11 years of labor, over 30,000 changes were made, of which more than 5,000 represent differences between the Greek text used for the Revised Version and that used as the basis of the King James Version. Most of the other changes were made in the interest of consistency or modernization. So again, you have these changes. You have from the Vetus Latina, all the codices, all the books that was translated into English, and I give you a list of all these people who gave you Bibles up until the point we get the King James Version where that was revised again. And then you have this book that people want to sit here and say is perfect. There's nothing wrong with the book. Everything about the book is perfect. It's from God. It's inspired. What have you. These people do not know biblical history. These are people who have faith and belief in a book and do not know its history. Now, there's no way you can go through this history to any sane person, with any sane person, and get them to still come out and accept that book. You should have questions from day one once you understand that history, which is why the history is never taught to you. They don't go through this in church. They don't tell you that history. Because when you know the history, you look at the book with doubt. You look at that book with a lot of doubt, and it's like, whatever. When you understand that history, you look at the book completely different. So then now we have to look at the history of it, and then the fact that after all that, everything that happened, even before the revision I'm talking about. So even when we got taught the book during slavery, it still wasn't considered perfect. You get what I'm saying? The 1880s, that's after slavery. So here again, what we was taught was changed. And then now we have what we have. It was revised in whatever way. It was changed. And then you can look in Revelations where it says, do not add or take away from the book. And we should all know and understand this fact that when you translate something is always lost in translation. The fact that, one, they did not go out and teach the people Hebrew, what the book was supposedly written in, or Greek, what the New Testament was written in, that they didn't teach the people these languages so they can read the book. They instead changed the book, which it says in the book, do not change. So again, it's so many questions when you start to look at the scholarship and history of the book that you gotta ask and you gotta look at and have doubt and definitely do your research. Okay, so now before we continue, let's sum this up and get people to really understand, because you got people who are truly confused about this point here, that what should shut everything down is the fact that we got the book from the very people who was enslaving us. Plain and simple. After all the history, when you understand the history of the book and everything that it entails, how could you then, continue to follow that book? But you got black people walking around saying that this is our history, that the Bible is black history. So you have these people who enslaved you, basically tortured you, treated you like crap, got rid of your history and the proof of any of your accomplishments, any of your achievements as a people, got rid of it. People who basically took your language, who basically, covered up anything that we did, that we can attribute to us being not primitive, us being actually intelligent people, gone. Why would they go through all that? Why would they do all that, then turn around and give you your history in a book that you can't even read? And it don't make sense. Why would they go through the slavery? Why would they go through tearing down and destroying African civilizations, covering up our accomplishments, just to give you your true history in a book? And then why would God wait 200 years to revise it, to make it correct after slavery? I mean, think about this. And then you have people that's going to say, this is going to be their reply to this. Their reply is going to be, well, there's nothing wrong with the book. Anybody who tell you that, as I always say, they never read it. There's nothing wrong with the book. It's the people who gave us the book. These Europeans are interpreting the book wrong. The white man is interpreting the book wrong. And the white man used the book to trick us and to keep us enslaved, But the book condones slavery. So how could they use the book to basically trick us when the book is condoning slavery? Plain and simple. That should tell you something. Oh, the book is fine and God gave us the book is okay. It's just the white man used it to condone it. No, the book is condoning it. The book, they're doing exactly what the book says they should do. Plain and simple. So you kill all that when you read Ephesians 6:5, which says, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. And I've said, how are we supposed to obey them and put them on the same par as Christ? Don't that sound like something that people who wrote the book, this white man, would put in this book? And then you have black people who don't get that, who can't see that simple fact. Plain and simple. It's right there. So the fact that it would say, to put the slave masters on the same par as Christ definitely should raise, eyebrows. To look at that and say, how do we put these people that is responsible for the torture and murder and rape of people on the same par as Christ, who's talking about love, peace, and mercy, forgiveness of what have you? Think about that. And people don't even fathom that. And then you have the Hebrews who come with this doctrine, and then people don't, fathom or put it together, the fact that you have the book condoning slavery, the book basically telling you to obey your slave masters as you would Christ, and the simple fact that we have in Deuteronomy books, a doctrine that basically teaches that we are cursed. The reason why, we should basically accept this is because we have been cursed and doomed to basically be enslaved by these people. And that the book is given to us by those very people, taught to us by the very people who's enslaving us. And then we go back and look and see the fact that the book's creation was by these same people. And the fact that other fucking white people didn't even want to believe the book. And that these people weren't even following the book themselves. All of that. Yet you still have people blinded by this book. It's so much. It's so much. Even if you wanted to follow it, in truth, you couldn't because of all of these issues. Anything else would be like it's bullshit. But because it's this religion, people want to accept it because it has to deal with this spooky God. Anything else we would look at and say it's bullshit. So you have a man named Dwight Callahan, who basically wrote a book called The Talking Book. It's about African Americans and the Bible, what have you. And, during slavery and everything like that. He was basically talking about how the slave master would, when a slave would ask, what was the book? He would say to the slave, well, the book talks to me. And, it was one of the ways how they decided who would basically become the preacher. So if you say the book's talking to me, he would leave the book in a room and walk out and see who would go in there and try to listen to the book. So then this way he can be like, well, the book is speaking to me. I'm going to tell you what it's saying and you tell it to the people. And this is how you pick out your so-called preachers who's going to be telling the people, well, this is what the book said. This is what Master told me that the book said, and I'm going to preach it to y'all, you know. So he basically was interviewed about the book and about everything he, researched and discovered about slavery and what was going on. And I want to go through a couple of the questions so you can see what he was basically asked. It says here. So he's asked, so how did the Bible become essentially a spoken word for many people? Talking about basically black people. Well, in several ways, perhaps one of the most important way, particularly in the early phase of what we could call the Christianization of the African slaves, was through music. When the slaves encountered these stories, they made the stories their own through the music that we now call the Negro spirituals. And so stories of the Bible were communicated, then were remembered in a kind of musical shorthand. And so the Negro spirituals were, of course, shot through with biblical references and biblical images. That's the vocabulary of the Negro spirituals, if you will. So then he's asked, now there was a situation between Frederick Douglass and his contemporary where they argue over sending Bibles to Southern slaves. How did that play out? It says here, he says, well, there was really a debate between two groups of African Americans. One that advocated the Bible be sent to the South. Frederick Douglass rose up and argued against this. Here's a man who had been illiterate. Frederick Douglass, amazingly enough, even though some people refer to him in his lifetime as the greatest orator in America, this is a man who didn't learn to read until he was an adult. He taught himself and he learned of the Bible first or by hearing it read by his master and his mistress. As always, the interpretation of the Bible reflects the interest of those who interpret it. Remember that when you go to church, anybody who's still gone, the interpretation of the Bible reflects the interest of those who interpret it, which is why when you go to church, your preacher is giving you sermons on anything that's going to reference, money, poverty. Oh, this is why you ain't getting your harvest. This is why you ain't doing this. This is why your life is like this. All the time when you go to church, the preachings and the teachings, somehow it's going to revert back to money. It always get into money some point and how you being selfish and how you should share and how you going to get your blessings from giving. You get what I'm saying? That's the agenda. He's interpreted in a way so you can see yourself as giving money and receiving something in return. So now it goes on to say, so for the slaveholding class, the Bible was very important for them as a warrant for what they understood to be their right to own slaves, to own people. And they preached it that way, that the Bible says that they were to be slaves. They were to be obedient slaves, that was God's will. And there are passages in the Bible that suggest that, as I have read. And he heard those passages, slaves be obedient to your masters. And he knew that those are the passages that those slaves in the South would hear over and over and over again. And so he thought it would be better for them to not have that book at all.